UK Cinema History, Season 2, Episode 6, The Innocents, directed by Jack Clayton. Hello and welcome to UK Cinema History. I just saw Clubhouse has another update, but no worries, I did not update the app and won't be until after the room, so we won't have to worry about technical glitches. As usual, we're just going to wait and see who shows up. And here we go. We've got 3 people already, and of course our perennial panelist, Hi Bender. Hello, Hi. How are you, sir?
Hey, Eric. I'm great. Great to see you. And hey, Ruby. I'm going to invite you to come on stage. You don't have to, but I'm going to invite you. First, Eric has to mod me.
Oh, nope. I gave you the green power. You know, it used to be I could make people permanent mods, but that's another Clubhouse change. Where when they came into the room, they could be mods, but you know, they still, at least they give me the co-host thing, so I don't have to invite. I can pick a number of people and not have to invite them to speak just to get them on stage. Hello, Leonard.
Hello.
How are things in Scotland today?
Pretty good, I would say, yeah. I mean, the weather was pretty crap, but, that's predictable. And, yeah, well, overall pretty good. Actually, speaking of Scotland, Deborah Kerr was born not far away from where I live, probably like a 20-minute walk, so that's quite interesting. There's a little plaque there saying this is the house where Deborah Kerr was born. I just randomly walked past that a few weeks ago, and that was quite interesting.
Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah, I hadn't even thought about her being Scottish, but I guess yeah, she is.
She spent most of her life in
Yeah.
other parts of the UK, but apparently she was born here in Scotland, yeah.
Yeah. She gets a lot of coverage on our on UK cinema history. She comes up quite a bit between her work with the Archers and here, and yeah, and she even came up in our Dead of Night. Deborah Kerr. It rhymes with star, as Sammy Goldwyn once said. Well, we're gonna. I used to do 15 minutes, but we're gonna cut it back to like 5 or 10 minutes, just to see if we can get a few people here, because I've kind of come to the conclusion that if somebody comes in late, it's not gonna kill them. You know, honestly.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. We've done that the last 2 times with understanding movies, and it worked pretty well. It also, a lot of people kind of join the room in the beginning, and then when they hear that we're talking about like something completely unrelated, they kind of leave. So it
No,
mitigates that
that's
part.
exactly right. It's rude to it's rude to people who are new to the room. Leonard, great to see you. Ruby, great to see you on stage. Sela, and I'm trying to get your name. Um, Ed, Gotham, is that it?
Yeah, this is Gautam.
Got it, Gotham. Great to see all of you. Thank you for being here.
Hey, I haven't watched it yet, so I might drop down because I don't have anything to say, but I just want to say thanks for inviting me.
Oh,
we,
stay on stage. You know, I mean, if you're going to be in the room, stay on stage. We might say something that sparks something in you at any point. So it's beside you glamming up the room. So we'd love to have you on stage as long as you're able.
Yeah, and we learned with Wizards last week that people think that they might not have something to say, and then all of a sudden they do, and then they drop back to the audience, and we've got to bring them back up. And so, yeah, we'd prefer if people just stay on stage. I did want to do a couple of programming notes. Leonard, I'm going to let you do the first one over at Understanding Movies, and then I wanted to talk about what's going on over at Sela's Aristoposian Poet Room.
Yeah, so we're doing next Saturday, so that's not this one, but the 24th of February. We're doing Topaz by Alfred Hitchcock, so that's probably going to be quite a lively discussion. Clashing views, because it's a movie that is very much hated by a lot of people, but Daniel and myself, we like it a lot. So there you go. So this is going to be a lively discussion, I think. Hai already told me that he he called it a train wreck, so I would say that's probably not too positive. Yeah, but so that'll be quite interesting. So if anyone's interested, we're gonna do that next Saturday, and yeah, so I hope to see people there.
It'll be a knockdown, drag-out fight.
Yeah, I think train wreck is being generous, but anyway, unwatchable was the word I used. But
So it's
actually, no, I
2v2 then.
upgraded it to
It's 2v2.
almost. I've upgraded it since watching it the second time because I realize now I watched a version that had 20 minutes cut out of it. Now it's only borderline unwatchable, so it is a slightly better film than the first time. Sila, my buddy, my pal over at Aristoposian. Am I pronouncing that correctly now?
Yeah,
Poet,
that's
you're.
good. That's good.
Ah,
Aristotelian.
I practiced all
It's a
day, and then
made-up word, so it does. There's no wrong or right. I made it up, so.
But tomorrow, 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, you're going to start your series surrounding the birthday of my personal favorite director, Luis Buñuel. And then you've got it again on Monday and then following Friday, all at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. What movies are you going to be covering on those 3 days?
On the 16th is Andalusian Dog. On the 19th is Simón del Desierto, Simon of the Desert. 23rd is Land of Bread. And 25th is Rehearsal of a Crime.
That's Archibald de la Cruz, right? The Criminal Life of Archibald de la Cruz.
Correct.
That's
It has
right.
like 3
Yes,
titles.
yes. That's what it's called in the United States. So yeah, they always do that, don't they? They release things under 10 titles. The great thing about all 4 of these movies, well, 2 great things. Number one, they're all available free online somewhere. A couple of them are on YouTube. Simon of the Desert takes a little bit of work to get to, but they are all
I
available. But
believe
the other thing,
it's Simon of the Desert. I believe is on the Criterion Channel. So if people have
yeah,
that,
I don't.
can look at
I
it.
was saying free, so people don't
Yeah,
have to
yeah,
pay.
yeah. Of course, yeah.
So people don't have to pay for it. Yes, Simon Desert is available in a very beautiful print on or you could do what I do and buy the box set off of eBay and pay way too much for it. But no, you don't have to do that. But very important filmmaker in terms of Spanish cinema, Mexican cinema, and French cinema. Also in terms of surrealism. The other great thing is all 4 of the films that Sila has chosen are under 90 minutes. 3 of them are under an hour. So it's not that much of your life. So, but
So is this going to be on Sila's house, right?
It might distort your life, but it's not too long.
Simon of the Desert is awesome. Sila, what house is this taking place under?
These are in Aristoposian Poet. I'm doing one in the Spanish one, but that's separate. But all the ones I mentioned, all 4 will be in the Aristoposian Poet house.
And is the name of that house in your profile?
I'm sorry, what was that?
Is the name of that house in your Clubhouse profile?
Yes, they
Okay,
all are. Yeah,
awesome. Thank you so much.
that's the one that I use the most. I use mostly that, and then the opera one. But these are on my profile.
That sounds great. Thank you for doing a series on
if you
such a great filmmaker.
if you've got a iPhone, feel free to throw the link up top there, Sila. If not, you can throw it in the comments. I would also like to note Sila did me a solid because he knows how much I love Buñuel, and he rescheduled all of these rooms to make sure I could be there. He worked them around my work schedule, and I thank him for that.
When I do my opera rooms, that I think for the most part goes by itself. But this type of work I find really needs somebody to do ping pong thinking with. And since I value doing ping pong with you, I figured, I mean, it's only good for everyone, better for everyone if we can do that when we can discuss it.
Well, I appreciate that even more. All right, well, let's get started on today's film, The Innocents. This is the second film by director Jack Clayton. A brief intro in terms of we discussed him briefly when we were talking about The Entertainer about why I wasn't going to do his first film, which was Room at the Top, but which was also photographed by Freddie Francis, who comes up a lot in this room, and he's going to come up a lot more because he also did Saturday Night, Sunday Morning that we're going to be discussing next month. Check our schedule. We're scheduled out through the middle of March right now. But interestingly, Jack Clayton started out as a producer and then became a director. So his first credit was as the executive producer of Beat the Devil, which was, of course, written by Truman Capote, who Jack Clayton credits with about 90% of the screenplay for this film. So I think that's enough of a little bit of a backdrop. Don't worry about spoilers on this. We are going to go as deep as you want to go. I think it's safe to say for a 1962 movie that we don't have to worry about spoiling it. But Hi, your first thoughts on The Innocents?
Well, first of all, I wanted to say to folks in the audience, if you want to come on stage, please raise your hand. We'll be delighted to bring you up. Um, so, in terms of Truman Capote, this was during his In Cold Blood phase, and literary folks saying, he didn't work on anything except In Cold Blood because he was so obsessed about it. In fact, he wrote most of his screenplay for this film. So it's a little snobby of those book folks to say that. This, to me, is one of the greatest horror movies of all time, one of the greatest ghost stories of all time, and psychological horror. So it's it definitely counts as something that he worked on during his In Cold Blood phase. And as for Deborah Kerr, she had a incredibly rich and successful career spanning 3 decades in Hollywood. She was in a number of classic films. She says that this movie is the best performance of her career. So that those are both really powerful reasons to give this movie a chance. Um, I I'm blown away by how great this movie is. I watched it many years ago and was deeply impressed by it. I watched it this week again, and I like it even more. I saw things in it that I didn't the first time, and it's just an extraordinary piece of work. I'll just we'll dig deeper, but that's all I'll say starting out.
Thank you. Hi. Leonard, this was not your first time watching the film, if I'm mistaken, but you said that you didn't remember it very well from the first viewing, so it was practically a first viewing for you, correct?
Well, yeah, so it was my second viewing technically, and you're right. I believe I did say that I don't remember too much of it, but that mostly means with me that I don't remember it like really, really well, since I've only been
Did
into
you
movies
fall
for
asleep again?
no, no, no. So it's just, I've stayed completely awake both viewings, for once. um, but what I was saying is like, if I say I don't remember a movie that well, it's probably just since I've only been really into movies for like 5 years, it probably just means um, I can't remember it incredibly well. Regarding like, I really remember liking it a lot when I first watched it. I watched it again, and I still like it. Um, there are things there are a few things that bother me about the movie, but I can't really point quite to what it is. It isn't anything specific. Um, but it's in part, I guess, like one thing at least I find interesting actually. I wouldn't call this a thing that bothers me, but one thing that kind of let me say it itches me, right? Is towards the beginning of the movie when kind of the Deborah Kerr character comes in onto the entire property, where she's supposed to raise the children. Uh, it's like it's shown to be like really really nice, but to me like I cannot relate to that whatsoever. Like this would be like this would be complete hell for me to grow up in if I were a child, and if I were to raise children, I would find that probably horrible to raise children there. It's like in the middle of nowhere, there's no social interaction to anybody else. I guess that's maybe part of the point, but like I could not relate at all to the movie portraying that as being like kind of a raising a children paradise. Yeah, which I found quite interesting. I wouldn't call it something that bothered me. Yeah, I think that's the wrong way to put it. Regarding the horror aspect of it, um, I don't like to say these things because I kind of agree with Daniel there that I don't really believe in discussing genres too deeply because I think they to an extent minimize the movie. But it is an interesting pattern that I find with most horror movies. I'll just say that is that I don't tend to be the biggest fan. Like I tend to kind of not like them as much as most people do. Um, and I think this is like an exception. I think this is a pretty good movie, right? And if I look at the other horror movies I like, they include like Caligari and the Phantom Carriage, and Faust. So Few Silence, and really I kind of like those movies less for the horror aspect and more for like other things, right? So you could even argue that this is maybe like my favorite like kind of horror movie, The Innocents, that is, right? My favorite horror movie that is like that where I really like the horror aspect of it in of itself, because I'm not scared by Caligari whatsoever, or by Faust. Yeah, so I think The Innocents handles that really well. Um, I will be really interested to see. Like I believe Eric, you've said that the movie may or may not be a ghost story. I'll be really interested to see what you have to say there because, um, you know, I was kind of keeping that in mind while I was watching the movie, and I think it's definitely a ghost story, and I would be interested to see like what kind of explanation could be, uh, that would be like a completely rational one. So yeah, but I'll just leave it at that for now. Yeah, it's a pretty great movie.
Oh, don't you worry your pretty little head there, Leonard. I have notes. I have notes. No worries. Sela, your thoughts on was this your first viewing of The Innocents, or had you seen it before?
First time, but not the last time. So I have a lot of things that I could comment on. I would like to come later with sharing of a section of a piece that I found where they give you the possibilities as to what is going on in the movie. And I find it very interesting to dive a little bit into that later. I'm in the middle of cooking now, so I would just stick to a couple of thoughts. It, the first, I would say, 15 or less minutes of the movie, I was saying to myself, this film is so beautiful, so well done. I love this woman. I love the architecture. How can they push horror into this thing? It didn't last long until it came to that. But similar to what Hai and Leonard have said, especially Hai, I just I was really amazed by the quality of the film, the beauty, the the symbolic that is one of the reasons I need to watch it at least one more time. There's a lot of symbolism into it that it is absolutely impossible to read. I think it is impossible to read unless you get somebody to tell you, look at that, that happened before, that is happening again. There are so many things. And when you say, Eric, that was his first film direction job, or his first time,
Second.
second, You said his second?
Yeah, second. Room at the Top was his first, but yeah, this was his second.
Oh, okay, okay. Well, it does, I don't think it makes a big difference from the first to the second. I find, as a director, that is an incredible feat what he did. There is so much, the orchestration of it, the choreography in terms of architecture instead of in terms of thought, instead of um, the study of the faces. The girl, if I remember correctly, is the first time she has ever acted. This is incredible what Deborah Kerr brings with her facial expressions. Um, Also, the some situations, especially after that particular kiss, the twinkling of the lips of the young boy Stevens is just, there's so much amazing detail that I find actually could not be orchestrated. It is so natural. Another thing about natural, I find it to be that the dynamic between the governess and the maid, it is so perfectly tuned that it is so easy to believe and forget about the horror that is supposed to be embedded in it. Because every time the governess says something that is not really, it doesn't make sense to the maid, she is able to explain it again with other details that the maid has to say, yes, you're right. And there is such a perfect um, tonality between the two, and even towards the children, that you really start to believe everything, that you believe that the ghosts are real, you believe that the ghosts are not real. I start believing everything that they're doing because I find it so perfectly um, orchestrated, so perfectly acted. Um, I'm very, very, would say, um, and I think it's important to be careful with such expressions, but I continue to stay by the idea that the best film I have ever seen was Gotland, and I would say this one comes very close to being one of the best, definitely not the best, but one of the most magnificent pieces of artwork in the cinema that I have seen.
That is high praise from someone who doesn't give a lot of high praise. So, yeah, the ghost of Jack Clayton is got to be clapping by now. I'm going to get my technical points out of the way because they're usually the least interesting. But this was a very early film in England for Panavision, the widescreen format, and I think that the use of Panavision, coupled with the use of very wide angle lenses on this film, is extremely revolutionary, and I think it's one of the reasons why it has a rewatchability factor that other films that where the technology kind of took off don't, because of course then they were imitated, ad nauseum. Whereas what Freddie Francis did with the wide screen here was to use it to his advantage to create space, and that space between the characters creates space between the audience and the material, and gives you that extra eerie, extra feeling of alienation. But from a technical standpoint, for a film that has as much camera movement as this, Panavision, which is what's called an Anima-4 lens, it's a separate lens that squeezes the image onto the film, so that then the opposite lens can be put on the projector to stretch it out to be almost 2.5 times as wide as it is tall when they show it in the theater. Is very difficult to move a camera around because you have two separate lenses. That means if you're moving the camera, you have to have two separate people pulling the focus. And but it also means is that if there's any jostle, any bump or what have you, you're going to see it because the thing is stretched out. But the way that Clayton and And Freddie Francis got around this was by Francis inventing a glass sheen that he could use to silhouette characters that would give just kind of a dark ring around the characters and the people when the camera is moving, and then it could be removed for the wider shot, but which is not something that you could do in a color film for obvious reasons. But in this film, what's very, very interesting is because it's using deep focus and very wide angle lenses, you have to have a ton of light because of what's called the aperture setting. That is to say, what we call the f-stop on our camera. You know, that if you have the f-stop all the way open and it's letting a lot of light in, the depth of field or the focus behind your figures gets blurry, whereas as you've got the f-stop or that iris closes, it focuses the image more, and so you've got more depth of field. And what they came up with for these scenes with the candles and what have you, something that Stanley Kubrick would also use for Barry Lyndon, was they created multi-wick candles. So those candles were actually, and if you look in the film, you can see like they're putting off way too much smoke for how big those candles are. But the other thing is that there are racks and racks of light, to the point where Deborah Kerr was actually pictured on the set wearing sunglasses because there were so many lighting sets for this very dark looking film to achieve those effects. So I think the reason why someone with the sensibilities of Sela and High are attracted to it may have a lot more to do with the writing and the story, but I think Clayton's visual storytelling of that is what makes it a classic and gives it that rewatchability factor. So those are some of my technical notes. I do have a couple of more, but I'll squeeze them in later because I don't want to get too into the whole. This isn't UK technical film history, but
One,
go ahead.
One comment, if I may, Eric. In addition to the work with the lenses, isn't it true that for some shots he has smudged some of the corners, or is that part of what you were talking about?
He literally would use spray paint on glass, and he would put the piece of glass between the anamorphic Panavision lens and the actual prime lens, the wide angle lens that he was using, and and give it that smudging, and then light it so that the light looked like it was dispersing out from the center, so it looked natural. So you didn't just look like an old silent movie silhouette, that the silhouette looked like it was naturally what your eye would be seeing from the light source. Which is why Freddie Francis is, such an incredible genius. It's why David Lean ended up adapting him as his go-to cinematographer. When we get to Halloween, we'll be actually dealing with some films that Freddie Francis directed himself, because he made all the Amicus horror films as a director, but he ended up having scratched that itch. He went back to cinematography, and another film that we'll be doing the first week in March, The Elephant Man, was also Freddie Francis was a cinematographer on. So very innovative. He's a lot more talked about, I think, than Clayton. And part of the problem with Clayton is he wasn't very prolific. He's one of those people like Lindsay Anderson, who just didn't make a lot of films. He was very, very picky about the films that he made. The only big budget film he made was an adaptation of The Great Gatsby with Robert Redford that actually did financially quite well, but didn't do very well with critics at the time. I actually liked that film a lot more than most people, but it is kind of considered an artistic failure. But most of the films that he did after this, he did an adaptation of The Pumpkin Eater with Harold Pinter writing the screenplay. With Anne Bancroft. That's a very good but not very discussed film. And then he did for Disney an adaptation of Ray Bradbury's Something Wicked This Way Comes, that was actually taken out of his hands by Disney, re-edited, and new scenes were shot to make it more family friendly. And he said screw it, and he went back to England and just started doing TV movies for the BBC. And it's unfortunate because he definitely would be someone we talked about along with, like the Archers, and Lindsay Anderson and the great film directors. Had I think he'd been a little bit more prolific, but he was just very, very picky about the projects that he chose.
So, in terms of your comment about Sela and I liking it more for the script, I mean, I do focus more on writing, but I'm not blind to the visual splendor of this film and the incredible care that went into every frame of it. It's just a monumental piece of work in terms of the visuals. The technical term for what was forced on Clayton is CinemaScope, not VistaVision. Is VistaVision a generic term that covers things like CinemaScope?
Oh, did I say? I meant to say Panavision, which was what? The CinemaScope is. 70
Okay.
millimeter anamorphic. If I said VistaVision, no, that was Paramount. That was a totally different technology.
Yeah,
That's
I
the one.
thought.
That's VistaVision's the one that they shoot sideways.
Yeah.
No, this is
So
This is
it's
anamorphic.
Well, it's so it was CinemaScope. 20th Century Fox insisted that all movies that were made by its filmmakers would be in CinemaScope, and the problem was CinemaScope tends to flatten the image, and this is a movie that needed depth, and so Freddie Francis used the techniques Eric mentioned. Um, some other things, according to IMDb, Francis framed the wide horizontal frame with lots of vertical lines to break it up. He also conversely, used a wide space to emphasize shadowy spaces and using the emptiness towards an unsettling effect. Uh, and to that end, he'd often place characters at opposite ends of a frame. So they took a problem and turned it into an asset, which is something great artists do and champions do. So, and so they have this kind of unique look because they had this thing they had to work against, and they created something that looks unlike most anything else. So that's one of the cool things about the visuals. Francois Truffaut was in a cafe with I think it was Clayton, and he noticed Clayton was there, and he sent him a note, and it said that The Innocents is the best British movie since Alfred Hitchcock left for America. So that was a nice compliment from Truffaut. Also, here's some interesting little tidbits. Um, the uncle that was played by Michael Redgrave, Clayton was offered Cary Grant to play that role. I assume 20th Century had Carrie available. It's a short role. It's like a one-day shoot. So, and Clayton turned down Cary Grant. Um, I don't know why. I'm guessing he didn't want. I'm not sure why. I think he made a mistake, frankly. Uh, I think would have helped box office, and I think Grant would have worked in that role, that Playboy role. But anyway, I think that's kind of interesting. Um, the One of the most striking things about uh, I wanted to say about Deborah Kerr, um, the Miss Giddens was supposed to be in her 20s, and Deborah Kerr was 39. But I think it worked out great. I think the sexual tension, the sexual repression, is even more intense at Deborah Kerr's age than it would have been for a 20-year-old. So, and speaking of sexual tension, um, the ending, Ruby, I, I, I don't want to. I love having you here, but if you want to leave, I'll understand. But the ending, where that kiss at the end, 20th Century Fox had begged Clayton to cut that, to change that, to not end that way, because I think he feared there would be, um, at at best, resistance and lower box office, and at worst, repercussions. But Clayton insisted on keeping it, and so we have this, I mean, extraordinary ending that even this day, decades later, is an absolutely shocking, stunning ending that I don't know if right now you could do an ending with that in a modern film. So those are some more tidbits, and I'll shut up and let everyone. Oh, I wanted to say, folks in the audience, if anyone wants to come up, please just raise your hand. We'll be delighted to bring you up.
And actually, that serves as a good kind of transition into that the second kind of layer of this film, that psychological layer, which is very interesting. I'm going to go on record as saying I'm one of those people who finds Henry James very difficult to read, and I don't like when I finished the Golden Bow or the Golden Bowl. To me, it was almost like finishing Ulysses. Like I had accomplished something, not a novel that I had enjoyed in any way, shape, or form. But very interesting with Turn of the Screw. Up until the 1930s, it was almost considered de rigueur that the ghosts were real in the original James story, until a guy by the name of Edmund Wilson did a post Freudian analysis of it. And Edmund Wilson, for those who have forgotten him, was one of the great essayists. He's of course best known for From the Finland Station, which was his collection of essays where he tracked Lenin's movements from France to Moscow during the Russian Revolution. But he was the first one who come up with the idea that maybe those ghosts aren't there, and to point to all of the kind of phallic imagery, because it's a very, very typical of James, where very thinly plotted but very, very densely worded work, where he would have the narrator describe a painting in great detail for like three or four pages, and one of the things that they achieve very well in the film is putting those paintings in the background and keeping them in focus, so that you have that sort of Freudian symbolism that Wilson was speaking of in the essay. But this idea that are the ghosts real, or is it just a manifestation of her repressed sexuality is something that he had read back into the book. So I did take the trouble, because it's only 100 pages, of rereading Turn of the Screw for this room. And everything, and rereading Wilson's essay, and everything that he said is actually in that. So you can interpret it that's actually James's original intent, that we're supposed to believe that the ghosts aren't real. But then again, on this reading, because he is such a dense writer in that kind of Herman Melville way, you can also see the other side of it, because he intellectualizes almost every single point. And what I think this film achieves terrifically, and the credit apparently, according to Clayton, goes to Capote for this, is walking that fine line between both sides of that argument without tipping its hand. The only time Capote actually even admitted this, where the film really seems to sway your mind one way or the other, is the teardrops in the classroom. Where did they come from if the ghosts aren't real? And Capote actually said that was who considers this screenplay the best screenplay he ever wrote. He said that was the one mistake that he made. But other than that, and I'm going to open this up for wider discussion. But um, is there a definitive answer as to whether the ghosts are real, or whether they're psychological
Well,
manifestations? And if there is, what is your opinion?
just to address the teardrop, I thought about that because I knew Capote was upset about it. It could be her own tear. She could have cried and then she could have cried and then forgot that she didn't realize that the tear was her own. So, I mean, there's a way to explain away everything. We should also keep in mind the screenplay wasn't based so much on Henry James's Turn of a Screw as it was from a 1950 Broadway adaptation um, called The Innocents, same title as the film, by William Archibald. So the primary source material was the stage play more than the novel.
But Clayton apparently didn't like the stage play, because the stage play came down on the side that these were definitely ghosts, and that wasn't the film that he wanted to make.
I think
Which
I think part of that is the difference between mediums, but yeah, that is correct.
I agree with you, because that's just would have been a very subtle step to try and portray on stage. Yes, absolutely. But because you don't have close-ups, and you don't really see the facial expression, that you don't feel the repression, that the kiss between the 10-year-old boy and the 39-year-old woman from the third row of a stage isn't going to strike you the same way that it does in a film. I agree 100%. But back to my question, because and Leonard had kind of had brought this up. But did you come away from the film siding with one or the other, and if so, which?
It's actually quite interesting with me, because I can't decide. You know, I came away and I wasn't quite sure, but I do genuinely like the idea of the movie, or like this kind of movie having kind of an answer kind of hidden away somehow. Even if it's not like even if it's not tangible, or even if we cannot find it, I like the idea of there being like hints to point to an answer. Uh, so, but, but I'm not sure. Um, yeah, I would agree with you. They're like hints that suggest that it could be real. Like obviously, the teardrop, I would agree with that. That would certainly be a hint. Although I agree with what Hai said, that actually also crossed my mind that it just might be her own tear. Um, or or just some random water droplet for that matter. I don't know, but probably it would be more poetically if you'd say it's her own tear. And but they're also like, for example, the person she sees on the roof, like that on one of her first encounters, uh, maybe that was something that Miles has kind of, I don't know, put there. I don't know, uh, or I don't know. Like I do like the idea of the movie kind of having like hints to suggest things, but I wouldn't have found any other than what you've already mentioned. So uh, yeah, I personally don't have an answer, at least not at the moment.
Hi. Was it something? And I'm going to rephrase the question to you. Um, do you think that it is even fruitful to attempt to come down on one side or the other of that question?
No, honestly, I think it would be totally dumb to do that. The film is clearly designed to provide at least three different interpretations. One is there's ghosts. Two is it's all happening in her mind. Three is she's a pedophile. Um, so those are all at least three, reasonable interpretations of the film, and it's designed very meticulously to not come down on any particular point of view. That is the point. That is the deliciousness, the uniqueness of a movie, is that it wants us to be able to uh, view all of those as real possibilities without coming down on any of them. To be able to keep that balancing act of those are all valid interpretations. And by the way, what did we do just a few days? What movie did we cover just a few days ago? Um, Anatomy of a Fall, which has a kind of a similar, gimmick, which is I don't know. Here's clues that she did it. Here's clues that she didn't do it. Here's clues that maybe the dog did it. Uh, so uh, yeah, that and there aren't a lot of films that do that. Partly because it's hard to do, but they did this with incredible poetry and grace and beauty. So I think it's kind of vulgar to ask, well, what do you think? It's not. It's just not the point. The point is to, I think, to admire how beautifully they pulled off that balance.
I actually agree with what you say. I take back saying that I like the idea of there being like one right answer. I think the way you put that, that definitely makes sense. And um, yeah, I guess what I'll go back to what I said with like I like the idea of there being hints to answers. But obviously, with what you said, that I think that is definitely a beautiful way of putting it. That there are like different, you know, interpretations of it, and there are like hints that suggest that all of them could be right. I think I do like that.
And you also brought up an interesting point with the third option of the sexual repression being actual pedophilia, which is something that is in the James story, but not with her. So this is something that either Capote or I haven't read the play version of this, so it might have been in the play as well, but was definitely created for the innocents, with because of course in the novella, she's actually in love with the uncle and is constantly attempting to get the uncle's attention, which is kind of hinted at here and there, but her sexual repression is expressed there, and there is a darker version of the backstory than that is only kind of hinted at in the film that suggests that perhaps these two children were victims of sexual abuse by the valet and their former governess, and in the film they suggested they had witnessed things that they shouldn't have, but in the book, which is very typical James, because he basically had two subject matters, which is too early or too late. That people arrive at things and they're too early to understand them, or they're too late to enjoy them. Those were his two themes, and of course this is one of his two early works. The getting kicked out of school, all of that was an acting out after they had been abused by either the valet or their former governess. I say it's hinted at, but it's definitely in this film. They don't shy away from it, 100%. I mean, I didn't at any point say, oh well, that's too subtle or what have you. That line about them using the bedrooms as if they were the deep dark woods, is an excellent hint at that. But it is interesting, and the reason I give credit to Capote is because that's very Southern Gothic, and for a British governess film, this has a lot of Southern Gothic in it. But
Capote
thoughts
didn't write.
about the child sexual abuse theory?
Well, I just want to say Capote didn't write the Deep Dark Woods line. That was there was another a writer they brought in specifically to make it more um, of its time, of that period, and that's where that line came from, was from that other writer.
May I ask, like, I'm interested now, for the third interpretation that you mentioned, Hi, the pedophile one, what what would be like the overall interpretation of that, with regards to the movie? So, obviously, I'm just thinking back to what the movie is showing. Obviously, they're the two close-up kiss scenes, which they certainly do kind of raise that question. I also thought about that, but would like the ghosts, would they be kind of her being her trying to her kind of reconciling with the idea that she wants them to be adults or something, and then they are just adult versions of themselves or something like that, or like what exactly would the overall interpretation be?
Well, and interpretations, not the only one. First of all, there are indications that we're told the uncle is a playboy, basically. Um, he's such a playboy that he can't be bothered for even a second about taking care of her children. And so he gives a total stranger total control over their lives and tells her to never bother him about them. So, um, but part of part of what makes him a playboy is that he's very charming and attractive. And uh, she apparently finds him attractive as well. There is this line near the end where she says, um, I don't want him to think, what that he might think that I'm just trying to get his attention. And that line comes like out of nowhere. It's shocking. It's like, I mean, when somebody is obsessed with something and they make a remark where you had no idea it was even in their mind, and they're implying it was in your mind because it's been in their mind the whole time. That was that line where it's like, it never occurred to me that you were trying to get his attention. I thought you were focused on the children. What in God's name does that comment mean? So then all of a sudden, we're looking at looking at things in a whole new way, that she's not, is she caring about the children, or is she trying to get the attention of this guy that she finds attractive? But the other thing is, he's not like that super attractive. In fact, maybe that's why Clayton said no to Cary Grant. Maybe because if it was Cary Grant, who wouldn't be attracted to him? But if it's Michael Redgrave, then it's not the particular man, it's her sexual repression that's at issue. That would make sense. So the point is that she's immensely sexually oppressed. So on the one hand, she's got a crush on this guy who hired her with no cause. She met him for like 5 minutes, and everything she knows about him makes him rather despicable. So why would she have a crush on this guy? Why would she want for him to be thinking about her? Doesn't make any sense unless she's immensely sexually repressed. And if she's that repressed, and here's this kid who is also charming, who has the same blood running in his veins, who gives her flowers, who tells her she's pretty, who calls her my dear, and then kisses her on the mouth. Um, Maybe those repressed feelings can then flow to him as well. And what she had a lot of options after the little girl started having her nervous breakdown, which, by the way, it did not occur to me that they were abused in any way, but the idea that the two previous the people who became ghosts might have sexually abused them or exposed them to sex in a way that's totally inappropriate. That, in other words, gave them a kind of PTSD. Then the little girl's meltdown makes so much more sense because it wasn't just the memory of a death that she was suppressing, it was the abuse that she was suppressing because she was too young to deal with it. And then Deborah Kerr forces her to confront something she's not ready to confront, which gives her a nervous breakdown. So that's really interesting. That does fit. But in terms of sexual repression, when the little girl has her nervous breakdown, Deborah Kerr had a lot of options. One of the weirdest options is to send away everyone except for the little boy so they could be alone together in this huge house. That is a kind of it's like one of the craziest choices she could have made. But if she's sexually repressed and attracted to the boy, then it makes sense from that angle. So those would be some of the clues arguing for the pedophilia perspective. And also, given what Eric said about the trauma, maybe Deborah Kerr experienced sexual abuse when she was a child, leading to her repression and leading to her attraction to the boy. Um, so there's all kinds of possibilities. And by the way, this is one of the reasons the technique of not explaining things, of leaving things open and ambiguous, is artful because it allows discussions like this where we can talk about it and say, well, what if this happened? What if that happened? Does this fit better? So yeah, I think it's really interesting things to think about, and just a testament to this film that it supports all of these conjectures.
Well, and to answer your go ahead, Leonard. I'm sorry.
Oh, I was just about to ask, like, so do you think the that interpretation, like the pedophilia interpretation, rules out either of the other two? Or I mean, because like obviously, if it's if the ghosts are actually real, then that would I think that would kind of rule out the idea that it's not real, obviously, and vice versa. But can the pedophilia interpretation exist in conjunction with one of the other two? What do you
It
think there?
can, just very briefly, it can because if the sexual repression is there, that makes her more susceptible to being possessed by a ghost who has wild sexual appetites. So they're not mutually exclusive.
And the relationship is suggested to be a very what we would now call dom sub type relationship, and the valet is reflected on as being kind of um, uh, manipulative and domineering, and uh, but I do want to dig into one part of what Hai had said, which is of course the idea that she has that to vacate the house and it's just the boy and her, and that if the boy just says the valet's name, Peter Quint. Peter Quint. Say the name. Pete Quint. Yeah, say the name. And I think on a first viewing and maybe even a second viewing, I thought that was kind of a flaw in the film, because I was like, that, it kind of reminded me of my protest with the Dark Knight. Like, why did the Joker think his plan would work? Where does that come from? Did she just pluck that out of thin air? It's not, as an idea goes, none. But rereading the novella and seeing the film this time, I fell thoroughly down on the theory that she had at that point crossed over into a kind of megalomania psychosis. Um, and this was an idea of, I'm in charge, and I don't care if it's a stupid idea, this is what we're going to go with. And you kind of actually see it in the change in Carr's performance. And so even that the pedophile doesn't completely eliminate the idea that the ghosts are real, because perhaps she is at that moment becoming possessed, because she does act completely differently for the rest of the film from that moment forward. But
She also
that's just a
dresses.
thought.
She dresses increasingly dark, and towards the end, she's dressed in black, which is what the previous governess was dressed as.
So there is actually a version of this film, so to speak, where the pedophilia is without the ghost actually being a manifestation of her sexual repression, and that the pedophilia is actually a part of the possession by these two ghosts. So yeah, but and of course, credit also to Henry James for writing the story like that, because of course he wasn't a person who cared whether his books were ambiguous or not, or even readable for that for that matter. But anyway, but it was a very good opportunity to reread this book, because it reminded me of just why I had such difficulty as a young person reading Henry James. And it wasn't because I was too young for him. It is just because he is a very difficult writer. You have to reread over and over his lines to understand what the heck he is trying to say. And I give credit to this film, taking a novella that is very, very, very heavy on description, very, very thin on plot, and making it not so involving and paced so incredibly well. This movie flies by, which is amazing considering what an incredibly small cast it had. Because you can't just, if something starts to dry up, you just can't cut to another set of characters, but yeah, so that would be my answer for you, Leonard.
I would like to touch upon a few things that have come up. First of all, I need to start with this idea. I'm not saying it's mine, but I keep thinking that there are two things in this, especially in this film, but not only, that I find happening. One is that the intellectual animal in us is forcing us to understand one or another. Is it happening or is it not happening? Who's crazy? It doesn't make sense? We're constantly going back and forth with this. The other side is the right that the artist has to play with us and put us in the situation where we cannot know exactly what happened and why. Another point, uh, the way I reacted earlier about Cary Grant, I think Cary Grant, even though he was homosexual, he would have displayed a very easy, palpable dynamic between the two of attractiveness, which I don't think happens with with Michael Redgrave. So um, then again, when he's very gentle, he's very direct, and he's very distant somehow, but at the same time he's forcing her to take the job, and does it at the end by kissing her hand with a very potent movement as to, so I think that would be an explanation as to why she says that towards the end, that what she intended with the, with him, which is not clear, of course, because they don't get on. We don't get to that. Uh, Also, in terms of the drop after the dead governess disappears from being at the desk, to me, that's one of these situations. I was expecting, for me, that would have been a clearer help for me towards understanding what's happening. I was expecting her to put that finger in her mouth to taste if that water is a tear or water. She didn't do that. As a result, I just left it at that. But it is still possible with so many flowers and so many people serving the house, meaning two, even though there's only three to be served, when they're um, taking care of the flowers, somebody could have dropped water. So for me, it was the only way that I could have said, okay, we're finding out some kind of truth that we can rely on, would have been if she, when she touches this, she brings it to her mouth to find out if it's salty or not. Then with the kisses, I do not go as far as to consider pedophilia at all. There's one point where Mrs. Gross mentions the things she has seen, and the children have seen it. So I'm gathering that these two were so wild that they did some things sexually that the children were not supposed to see. So it doesn't come over to the pedophilia part because nothing has really happened to them, but they have seen things, and that has perhaps disturbed them, which is probably the reason the Miles is expelled from school, because he has probably been saying things that are a little bit outside of the realm of a 12-year-old. Um, so the
Again, that's the Henry James theme of too soon. He's arrived at things too soon for him to understand.
okay, but
They are children who were forced to grow up quickly. That is that
correct,
that
correct, correct. My maybe one is the fact that their parents died. That might be one of them. The fact that the boy and perhaps the girl, she doesn't say it, but he says it, they know very well that the uncle has no time for them. So, and to me, that's also one of the situations when she refuses to refuse the first kiss. Well, actually, the only kiss that he gave her. When she does not refuse, to me, I connect that with her intentions of being for these two kids what they're not getting elsewhere. And she doesn't know exactly where to draw the line, in part because she's herself oppressed for whichever reason, and is having a hard time trying to, keep it all together. And then this thing with the ghost. So I find she's in a very weird situation. She doesn't know, except for the pressure that Michael Redgrave puts on her, that she's coming to this huge mansion. She shows that very clearly when she comes. I didn't, I didn't expect this. Then the kid is expelled, and she's not supposed to talk about it, and the maid doesn't want to talk about it, and she's having to deal with the ghost, but the kids say no, they're not there. I mean, she is really having to balance a very complex act, and nobody is really on her side in terms of reality. So I find that very interesting how there's probably three different realities going on. And if I do it now or later, you could tell me. That's where I would like to share this thing that I found, which is from Off Screen by Donato Totaro. I could read that now or wait until
Yeah,
later, but
now it's good. Now it's good.
okay, so it's not very long. The Innocents is a classic case of what Tsvetan Todorov called the pure fantastic, a film whereby the audience is stuck between two possible interpretations of the events experienced by the characters. Are the ghosts from the house's past real, or are they imagined by the characters as either a product of past trauma or psychosexual repression? If you expect that the ghosts are real, we arrive at one or more of the following meanings of the events. A. Supernatural explanation. Number one, the ghosts are real and have possessed Miss Giddens. Number two, the ghosts are real and have possessed Flora and Miles, in the process sending Miss Giddens to the brink. Number three, the ghosts are real and have possessed Flora, Miles, and Miss Giddens. One then can wonder why not Mrs. Gross. Number four, the ghosts are real and are simply expressing their evil presence onto the house, which affects Miss Giddens and the children, if not at the point of possession. If you accept that the ghosts are not real, we arrive at one or more of the following meanings of the events. Natural explanation. Miss Giddens is having a neurotic breakdown. Number two, due to Miss Giddens' sheltered life, she is sexually repressed and being exposed to both the salacious backstory of Miss Jessel and Peter Quint and Miles's precocious behavior. She begins to identify with Miss Jessel and project her sexual anxieties onto the ghost. Number three, less likely but possible, part of the psychological makeup is that Miles and Flora are scared, or I'm sorry, are scarred by sexual abuse they suffered under Quint and Jessel, and perhaps, just perhaps, they had something to do with their deaths. Maybe everyone at Bly, Mrs. Gross, Mrs. Miles, Flora, and the minor character Anna, all are guarding the secret of what really happened to Quint and Jessel. Perhaps, perhaps they were abusing the children and the others reacted to this by murder. And this would explain why the ghosts come back with vengeance. Is the reason Miles was expelled from school causing injury to others a hint of what he has been capable of or is capable of? And C, a third, altogether different reading is that the whole film is being imagined by Miss Giddens, as suggested by the opening and closing shots, and the repeat of a line from the credit scene to the opening scene, in which case, whether the ghost is real or not is inconsequential.
Yeah, and that raised two theories that we didn't even touch on. The theory that the children may have killed Quentin, the governess. Which again I think goes to the greatness of this film is the greatness of ambiguity. But Leonard, when you were talking about the opening of the film and how beautiful the mansion is and the talk of but that it would be like hell on earth for you because you'd be too far away from civilization and and what have you. That is actually the most faithful part of the film to the book. and I think it's magnificent because it's taking first person narration, which is her describing her thoughts about how she had feared it being kind of a dark old creepy mansion, and seeing it's so bright and so beautiful and what have you. And instead of having a narrator explaining that, it's shown visually with just a few odd lines to the coachman. And to me, that is the sign of a filmmaker who is not just adapting a literary work literarily, but is at creating a separate visual work of art.
I would agree. Yeah, that it's the entire sequence is told phenomenally. Yeah, I would certainly agree with that. Also, speaking of the opening, there was one line that I quite found uh quite well placed. Um, it's at the beginning while she has a conversation with the uncle, and he essentially says, "I have no room to raise them, neither mentally nor emotionally." And obviously, if you only look at the first half of that sentence, "I have no room to raise them," he's saying that in his giant office, and the camera makes like a points to like really make it look really stunning, and obviously you've got the large window and stuff. So if you take it at its most literal level, it's obviously totally ironic what he's saying there, and then neither mentally nor emotionally. Um, yeah, well, that I guess explains what he's trying to say there. Although both of those are very interlinked, mentally and emotionally, right? I mean, your emotions kind of are processed by your mind, right? Um, but then obviously everything is like blown to an entire different level once you see the actual mansion where they are raised. It's not just like that on Office, but they're literally, they're speaking about rooms that they don't even use and stuff. So um, yeah, it's certainly very great visual storytelling.
Well, and on the technical point, to make that office seem even larger, Francis is using a 14 millimeter lens, which brings us back to Brazil, because of course the majority of Brazil was shot with that 14 millimeter lens. And I don't know if they dug a hole or raised the stage, but the only way he could have gotten the shot with that lens from that angle was he would have had to have been practically on the ground with the camera in order to encompass all of that. So yeah, yeah, and this film is filled with those remarkable touches. But the depth of field in that shot, but the use of the scenery outside the window inside the shot, the separation between Kerr and Redgrave, with the center point being that window frame. So and you're having to match the light inside and outside from the window frame. I mean, it's no wonder Deborah Kerr had to wear sunglasses, because think about how many lights you would have had because of course it's bright and sunny outside. I mean, uh, this is just an extremely well made film.
Yeah, I guess she was expecting a dark, gloomy mansion before she discovered that Freddie Francis would be cinematographer and flood the set with so much light. People were worried he was going to burn the set down. So there's that. But talking about openings, let's go to the actual literal opening, because it's extraordinary. On top of everything else is extraordinary. The film opens with this wonderfully creepy song sung over a black screen for like 45 seconds before 20th Century logo appears. That's astonishing. How many movies do that? That is that is so ballsy to do that. And in some theaters, the projectionists assumed it was a mistake on the print and edited the movie themselves. So it started the appearance of a 20th Century Fox logo. Um, it's it's just a mind blowing opening, and it's just so ballsy. Like, because a lot of people are going to think, oh, what's wrong? What is there something wrong with my with my print or with my TV? And then it's just this haunting um, song that you just, and of course it's the motif throughout the film is that tune. Um, it's like in Brazil, that recurring theme. Um, but it's so wonderfully creepy, and it's just I, these are the start with the black screen and the end with the kiss. These were brave people. These are artists who did not flinch at taking chances, and God bless them for it.
And the actual opening of the film itself after the credits is interesting because much like we discussed with Quadrophenia, that is actually something that takes place after the ending. So the film is kind of in a circle. Or like
Yeah,
we
that's a
discussed with
great
Dead of
point.
Night.
That's a great point.
Um, because I didn't want to hurt the children. I only want to help the children. I only wanted to protect the
There's
children.
there's also the
And
motif of hands. That because we always see initially after we go from black are those hands, and hands are a never recurring image throughout the film. And by the way, the original script concept to start the film was a funeral for the boy, and Deborah Kerr's at the funeral, and everyone is shunning her, and that would have been immensely uh, immensely weaker than what they ended up going with. But it shows the difference between, you know, a normal way of doing things and pushing things to something transcendent and incredibly risky and brave.
well, yeah, and you mentioned John Mortimer, who was brought in as kind of like the Victorian dialogue doctor for the film, and you mentioned the line that he wrote. He wrote that initial opening, and he'd also written in a scene where the uncle comes and visits to go see a cricket match, and goes to the pub, and it has the explicit scene of Deborah Kerr trying to get his attention and about the ghost and him just like, I'm too busy. Nope, I can't. And both and I think both of those are wise decisions because not only, like you say, would it be weaker, I think it would be immensely less satisfying to have those things made explicit in a film like this. In a very strange way, the ambiguity of this is actually what it makes it satisfying. And any answer, if somebody comes to me and says, here, I've got this scene here that proves that this is the actual solution to this answer, to this film, it's going to lessen my enjoyment of it. And any scene that does that explicitly gives their hand away, to me would be like figuring out how the magician got the rabbit out of the hat. It's just a trick then.
The one thing that I want to share, because you might be able to help me, I have in this hunger to understand, I have no explanation as to why Miles died. If I think that he has been exercised in some way through that whole thing, then he would be free. But when I think, and that think that's what is projected in the film, that the apparently or possibly the spirit of Quint, or the obsession or the possession through Quint, leaves his body, why does he have to die? He could be then free. And then that also gives a different perspective to what I think in terms of the kiss that she gives him. Because if I understood that correctly, she kisses him because he has died. So
No, I don't
to
think
me,
she knows he's dead at that point. I think she
oh,
doesn't
no, no, no,
realize until after
I,
that. I don't think
no,
so.
I believe very strongly that it is at that point where she realizes that he's dead. That is when he kisses her. When she kisses him.
Mm, yeah, you know what? I'm gonna have to actually rewatch this film yet again.
But of course,
It'll be like
I,
my
either
ninth
way,
viewing.
either way, that makes a big difference.
Sila, I like that because that means you've given us yet another thing to think about. In addition to being a pedophile, she's into necrophilia. You're saying she, she kissed him specifically
well,
because he was dead.
well,
That's
all
a,
those all those pervy Victorians.
yeah. With Gothic, that goes a perfect combination. But anyway, seriously, when I was watching, I was paying attention exactly to that. I thought to understand that he had died, but it is very clearly in her face and her reactions that she is not aware of that. So when she notices he is dead, he has died, and yet they show his face clearly signs of being dead or without a soul or whatever you want to call that, then I interpret her connection to her on a very different level, because when he is not dead, then she might be taking advantage, she might be expressing some desire. That's one thing. But once she knows that he's dead, then her idea of kissing him has to do with perhaps the connection to that draw that she had to Quint through him, because now he's dead. And now she feels that the kiss is a, she's allowed to kiss him because he's dead, and that is her way of kissing the connection and not the boy, or saying goodbye to the boy. But very different in knowing that he's dead or not. When he's dead, then you're kissing for different reasons, always.
well,
I just
first of all,
rewatched the scene, by the way. I just rewatched the scene, and Sila is right. Yeah, like it's totally unambiguous. She kisses him after she realizes that.
well, first of all, in answer to your question, why did he die? Um, a few things. In that era, there was this notion of you could die from shock, and that was like a fairly accepted idea. So if you could have just a big enough shock, that could just end you, and not just for kids, but of course, kids are more delicate, as was demonstrated by the little girl having a nervous breakdown as a result of just a short interaction with Deborah Kerr, saying, there she is, there's your dead governess. So it could be that Deborah Kerr drove him to his death by her insistence, basically doing the same thing that she did with his sister, which effectively,
Correct.
from a psychological interpretation, she made his sister have a nervous breakdown. And then her great idea was, now let me do that to the brother. Now let me do that to the boy. The same thing I did. So it's like, and by the way, Mrs. Gross, who I think is named Mrs. Gross because she goes along with everything. She doesn't show any initiative, and she just, and if these children did go through some really traumatic events, I can imagine Mrs. Gross just, turning a blind eye,
Correct.
saying
Correct.
stuff and nonsense. So I think that's what's gross about her, is her ability to tolerate any evil that's taking place in the house. Because honestly, Mrs. Gross should not have said, "Sure, let's pack up everybody and leave you alone with this little boy after you destroyed her sister." She should have. That's not what she should have done. Um, but anyway, one possible explanation is she just repeated what happened with a little girl, and she made him die of shock. Um, Another possibility is she actually did exercise the spirit, but the shock of that spirit leaving his body killed him. Um, so that's also a possibility. And yeah, it's then there's a third possibility that even though she performed the exorcism, she was also attracted. She felt an attraction to Quint, and so that's a possibility too. And one other possibility no one's mentioned is the kid isn't dead, because you can't definitively say he's dead. You don't have a doctor coming over and examining him. You don't have a funeral because they cut that scene out. So there's nothing that you can say 1,000%. Yes, he's dead. He might have passed out. He might be in a coma. Maybe they take him to a hospital, and after 10 days, he comes back to life. We don't really know for that, even that for sure.
Yeah, it's the Victorian times. I just would have given him a leeching and given him some cocaine, and he would have been right as rain. But no, the I don't think that last one, the idea that the child doesn't die is a realistic one, though. I don't. And matter of fact, until you mentioned it, that hadn't actually occurred to me as a possibility. But maybe if I give it more thought or watch the film yet again, I will see that as a possibility. But that had never occurred to me before.
I'm not saying it's not my favorite explanation. It's not my favorite reading, but I think it's there. I don't think you can rule out that maybe he survived that. I don't think there's enough information in the film that we see. I mean, it's easy to think, oh, the script originally had the funeral scene, but that scene was cut. That's not in the movie. And so, based on what we're seeing, I don't think you can say with absolute certainty that the kid is dead.
I mean, I
Well,
would
and
actually agree with that. Because well, first of all, it was cut out for a reason. Whether it was this specific reason to leave ambiguity here, or whether it was just, I don't know, they wanted to have a more clean or, uh, you know, short ending. But it was cut out for a reason. So I think that you certainly have a point there. Um, and I would agree with Eric that it doesn't. I suppose it isn't probable the way it is shown. It's heavily implied, but it's still possible. And this is what I really like about movies, if they kind of leave ambiguity open. And I think I would agree here that they do it here. And also, may I add,
well,
a lot if Deborah Kerr, or her character, if she, um, whether or not we say that the ghosts are real or not, uh, she does imagine things, right? You, um, let's say they're even real or something, but if you look at the sound alone, there's this one scene where she imagines something and the birds just stop singing immediately, or some, aspects like that. So we clearly do view parts of the movie through her lens and through her
The
subjective kind
the
of
the,
surreal
the flower petals
perspective.
always falling
So
off the flowers every time she walks by. The flower petals,
yeah,
the
yeah,
bugs crawling out of the, yeah. For that interpretation, those are all in her head too. We're
yeah.
we're
Well,
we're visualizing her manifestations.
right. So you could follow that through and say like she she believes that he died, or she's kind of she thinks that he died, and we're experiencing it through her eye, and that's why the movie heavily implies it. But I would agree with her. Yeah, the possibility is certainly open.
And as far as stuff having been in the script, um, I this is just kind of a pet peeve of mine. That the film, the film is the film. Whether they planned on doing this, that, or the other thing with it, but that version of the script that John Mortimer, who didn't even get credited for his contribution to the screenplay, added those scenes for, was so heavily rewritten by Truman Capote that Jack Clayton claims that Truman Capote is responsible for 90% of what you see on screen, and that Clayton also says that he shot 100% of Capote's screenplay. So the film, before Capote's rewrite, it could have had all sorts of things in it that doesn't affect our interpretation of what we actually see on screen. Sorry, rant over. That's just a pet peeve of mine. It's like those people who say, "Well, George Lucas originally was supposed to have Luke Skywalker turn to the dark side," and it's like, yeah, on a bar napkin once, you know. It doesn't change. That doesn't make the actual film different.
There's another point that I would like to mention that also takes or took me away from the weight of the ghost idea or the suspense idea. And that is, there's a macabre spirit which I cannot tell where it comes from, but Miles, especially with the dove or the pigeon in bed with the neck broken, that that was a little bit outside of the realm of innocence of a child. That was a little bit um, intense, but he had an incredible ability to mix the two. On one side, cynical, sinister, um, um, tricky, but very sweet and very innocent and very gentle. So when he's saying, then at the end, he's saying, I'll bury it tomorrow, as to say, everything is well. I'll bury it tomorrow. And with that, I will no longer be a bad boy as I was trying to be by running around without socks on. So that scene there, when she discovers that pigeon under his pillow, tells me that the film is not necessarily only dealing with the ghost, but this child is a little bit gaga.
Well, and her line is, somebody broke its neck. Not it broke its neck, not passive voice, active voice. Somebody
Yeah,
broke
yeah, yes,
its
but
neck.
Eric, please. That child is so intelligent, and he's 12 years old. Any half intelligent child at that age knows when a bird is dead. It doesn't matter who broke it or not, but to put it under my pillow, that is beyond the pale.
But her line is important. Somebody broke its neck, not its neck is broken. not it broke its neck. Somebody broke its neck. She is directly saying, "Did you kill this bird?" to the boy, and he, of course,
Yeah, yeah,
is clever enough to it isn't, it's not, "I found this bird with a broken neck." It's somebody broke its neck and I have the bird.
yes, but
And there's a huge difference between the two in terms in
cor-
terms of malicious intent.
correct. But I am not addressing the intention. I'm addressing the way he hides it under his pillow and acts as if nothing out of the ordinary, anything strange is happening. He doesn't.
Well,
I'm not talking about his behavior because of who and how the bird was killed, but his reaction is one of, I'm not doing anything strange. I'm just keeping a dead bird under my pillow. What's so strange about that?
well, if he did break the bird's neck and he's putting it under his pillow, then he's keeping his victim as a trophy, which is what serial killers do. And this goes back to the question, and this is how serial killers start out, by the way. As children, they kill animals. And then as they get older, they graduate to killing people. And this goes to, why was he actually kicked out of school? What kind of injury did he cause? Also, um, it goes back to an earlier scene, because that's not the first time he dealt with necks. Earlier in the movie, he grabs, when they're playing hide and seek, he grabs Deborah Kerr by the neck and he
Yes,
starts
yes.
squeezing. And she says, "Stop it, you're hurting me." And his response is, "So what?" As if hurting someone is no reason to stop choking them to death. So, yeah, so we have a pattern established there of him. And again, the Mrs. Gross tells us that he was basically the disciple of Quint. And it could be that Quint taught him to be, effectively a sadistic killer. It's another possible way of interpreting uh, what's going on. Again, obviously, certainly not the only way, but another way of potentially viewing the events.
Or he could have observed Quint doing a kind of a sadomasochistic lovemaking with the governess, and just thought that that's how what grown-ups do as well. Because there is definitely a suggestion of kind of a dom sub relationship between Quint and the governess. So yeah, the, so I mean there are several interpretations of that, but all the interpretations go back to that same theme, which goes back to the title of Innocence, which is that this is a child who has experienced things that children should never experience, whether it's sexual abuse, whether it's whether he actually murdered two people, whether whether it was merely observing two adults making love at too young an age. This is a child whose innocence has somehow been lost, and it's up to us to understand exactly what of the many events it could be that have done it, but that's the resulting child that we have in front of him, and that makes the performance even that much more remarkable by these two young actors in these roles, because they're both having to play children as children and play full grown adults as children.
It's
By the
also
way,
possible. I'm sorry. It's also possible that the only person, including the uncle, the only person who is not innocent is the boy. That's also possible. Everybody, the innocence is referring to everybody except the boy.
that I was going to say something a little broader, but that's a great point. What I was going to say is simply that the innocence could refer to anyone and everyone in the movie. And Jack Clayton, I think, was actually, so he said at some point, the reason he liked the title is that they're all innocent on some level. And so it's not meant to refer simply to the children. Everyone on some level is dealing with a kind of an innocence that the film is challenging them with and making, because part of the problem with innocence is it makes you vulnerable to dark forces.
Yeah, because what they all have a naivete about them, each and every one of
Correct.
them about
Yeah.
some aspect. Yeah, and then of course in the kind of post-Freudian view, you going back to the Edmund Wilson, it's all relates back to something they're naive about psychosexually, which again, that's of course he was talking about the original novella and not the film. But I think Capote is picking up on those rhythms because, and I think Clayton is too, because another aspect, of course, is looking at all the portraits and paintings behind the characters as they're interacting throughout Bly, and the phallicness of the statues, and the mother and child painting when she's discussing her not being able to understand what her role is with these children. These are all post Freud. Obviously this was written before Freud was published or popularized, but these are all post-Freudian interpretations of Henry James, and which is interesting because normally when I see a film that has a lot of Freudian symbolism in it, I just kind of turn it off. But because it is integrated into the scenery so well, and because you kind of have to look a little bit extra for it, it really didn't bother me here the way it normally does.
There's even a statue that might be Jesus Christ, in some struggle. I don't know if it's after the resurrection or before, but there's a lot of symbolism that he put in with the flowers, with the spider, with the spider webs, in the office as well as in the mansion. I mean, there's a lot of things in there that need to be revisited.
Oh, a spider eating a butterfly. Think about that for a minute. I mean, you can't get more
Yes,
Freudian
yes,
than that,
and I don't know if this was intentional, but when the butterfly situation, I think actually before Flora says something about it. Before that, we see Giddens walking away, and there's a butterfly on her jacket. I found that very interesting, and also, for those who don't know that, Flora. Well, I'm that's a stupid statement that I just made, but flora is actually flowers. This presence of flowers is very, very intentional, but I don't understand exactly what he's trying to say. And then the girl is also called Flora.
Well, the flower petals fall off every time she walks past, as if they are dying. Um, when they encounter her life force, which is from the Henry James novel or novella. That aspect, which was written pre-Freudian. So that's not a Truman Capote post or Edmund Wilson post-Freudian interpretation. That's straight from Henry James.
Another thing that I find interesting is when we have, in this case, at least a couple of you have are familiar with the novel or with other productions of this idea. The in this case, Clayton. In this case, Clayton has the the privilege or the right or the freedom to do what he wants. But at some point, we could be losing or missing something in what he's doing because we are too influenced by another version. Could be an opera, could be the novel, something that gave us another information which Clayton was not necessarily addressing or seeing that way. And I find that interesting when we are trying to um, dive into this film. Where is the borderline Clayton and this idea of Clayton visually, and when the incredible cinematographer and the actors, and then in contrast, perhaps completely irrelevant and with a negative effect because of another interpretation.
And I think his first film, Room at the Top, suffers from the fact that it was imitated so many times afterwards. Well, it also suffers from the fact that the main character is a sexual predator, and um, uh, and what I think that he and Francis, who was also the cinematographer on Room at the Top, did here was they did something that no one would try again in terms of the camera work, in terms of the set design, in terms of of the framing devices and things like that, and so it looks fresh to us, and we aren't burdened, I think, with those other interpretations that we may have seen from like the Nicole, Tom Cruise's ex-wife's version of this, the others, or the 10 or 11 made for TV versions of this story that have been made, or or the Netflix TV series, because this looks, it feels, sounds, smells, tastes nothing like any of them in any way, shape, or form, and it stands on its own as a work of art. And so when an artist is able to interpret something, in this unique a way, any other version of it just kind of gets wiped from my brain. And because I have, they've earned the right, and I have put myself in their hands.
On many, many levels, I find this film really exquisite. So I'm very, very glad to have seen it, and I think I will have to see it again soon.
Well, I'm going to start winding this room down because, of course, yet again we've gone longer than the film, and and I try to keep these rooms about 2 hours because I just think that that's the perfect amount of discussion time for the room. So I am going to do a once around and get any last thoughts on the film. Also, if you've got any suggestions for. We still have the last film of March open for suggestions, or any just suggestions of films that you think we in the room might not have seen, and we might not and might like. Now would be the time to come up with that as well.
Well, first, I want to follow up on what Sela said, the idea of separation. I think it's interesting that Clayton did not give the children the script because he didn't want to know the dark aspects of our characters. He wanted the children to be children. So he would only give them the pages they were going to perform the day before. And that's all they saw. They didn't see the rest of his script, and they didn't see what was going to happen. They just got the pages they were going to perform the day before they were going to come on set. And so he kept them innocent, essentially, of the other interpretations of a movie and the movie as a whole. I think that's so. That's another way of not, in a way, contaminating one thing with another. At the same time, I didn't know that Room at the Top had a sexual predator So you can't help think that, that had some impact on this movie. In fact, his first film was about a sexual predator. So yeah, it's all very interesting. Um, I'm delighted, Eric, that you chose this movie. This is one of my favorite films, period. Um, I think it's uh, just so extraordinary on so many levels. I hadn't seen it for decades. I so enjoyed seeing it again, and I got much more out of it the second time. And it's just it's a testament to meticulousness in art, but I think it's also a testament to bravery, and to not doing what everybody else is doing, but to do something, bold and different. And I just think it's a magnificent work. Um, in terms of other films to consider, I'm not pushing anything. I'll just kind of throw out that this movie is often cited as one of the three best ghost movies of all time. The other two are The Uninvited, and The Haunting. And all three of them are in black and white, and all three of them uh, lean on psychological horror as opposed to graphic horror. So if you want to like follow a theme, you could consider The Uninvited or The Haunting to follow this up, since kind of they're kind of at the top of this mountain of psychological horror. But again, I also want to thank everybody who came to the room today. Especially want to thank, Eric and Leonard and Sela for their wonderful, insightful comments. I think I got more out of the film by having you um, wise souls contributing your perspectives on it. And again, special thanks to Eric for having this house and hosting this room and picking this film.
Thank you. Hi. Leonard, your final thoughts on The Innocents?
Yeah, my final thought is like I'll have to watch this again um sometime when I haven't seen like a total masterpiece before, because to be honest, The Innocence just suffers in comparison to Topaz, which I've just seen before. It's a total masterpiece that I was enamored by. Um no, I'm just kidding. I'm just messing with you guys. Although I do really like Topaz. No, I'm not saying anything bad about that. But The Innocence is um is a great movie, and I will definitely watch it again. It's stunningly made, and I think this discussion has solidified my take that this is perhaps my favorite kind of like horror movie where I properly like kind of the horror aspects of it, if that makes sense. Regarding other movies that I might recommend. By the way, thanks, Hi, for the recommendations. I haven't seen either of those, although I've heard of them. So, I'll definitely put them on my watch list. Um, and I won't watch Topaz before that, I guess. Um, but in terms of other recommendations for UK cinema history, I mean, I'm not saying like anything, but one movie that I would find interesting to discuss one day would be by David Lean, Ryan's Daughter. It's one of his lesser known movies. I'm sure you have seen it, but I think it is like a movie that is worth discussing, and I find it a shame that so many people kind of dismiss it in the context of his other big epics. Uh, you know, uh, yeah. Well, but apart from that, yeah. I'm always up for like new movies I haven't seen in UK cinema history as well. So I'll be looking forward to future discussions. And yeah, thanks for everyone for wonderful thoughts.
Speaking of lean, would Dr. Zhivago qualify for this house? Is that considered UK cinema?
I mean, obviously, the rule is that UK cinema is whatever I call UK cinema. So yes, of course it would.
Then I'll vote for Dr.
Dr. Shivago is
Zhivago.
also great. Dr. Shivago is also really great. Um, and I actually prefer it over Ryan's Daughter. But I find Ryan's Daughter interesting because it just gets a lot of criticism, and also it just doesn't get as much attention compared to Lawrence of Arabia, Doctor Zhivago, and even in comparison to A Passage to India. So, and I find that a bit of a shame because I don't think it's necessarily a lesser movie. But yeah, Doctor Zhivago, absolutely, I'd be up for that as well.
I would definitely do Dr. Zhivago above Lawrence of Arabia just because I love Lawrence of Arabia. It's a great film, but there's just nothing else to say about it,
It's actually interesting.
But
I've seen A Bridge on the River Kwai, Doctor Zhivago, Ryan's Daughter, and A Passage to India, but I have not seen Lawrence of Arabia. So I'll save that for a special day.
it's free on YouTube. Highly recommend it. Great movie, but there's just nothing else to say about it. I mean, it's discussed to death. But I would, but yeah, we're gonna have to do David Lean for sure. So maybe we'll do Dr. Zhivago for that last one in March. Since we're not really doing themes anymore. But I'll still keep it open just in case somebody comes up with something, or we all come to a consensus about, like, oh gosh, we really should do this film. But tentatively, I'll say I would vote for Dr. Zhivago. Sheila, your last thoughts on The Innocents?
Well, I don't really have anything to add about the movie in terms of content, but the last thought I would share is that I am amazed and very happy to see the magnificence that is possible in so many different directions. Like I have said before, this Gotland, the work of Bergman, the work of Almodovar, and then you see a film that is 60 years old and is dealing with something that is really not such a special story, but it is done in such an incredible, magnificent way that it doesn't matter if you're into suspense or not, if you're into horror or not, if you like car or not. It is such a masterpiece in my view that I am simply content to be able to see how many shapes of beauty there are. And in terms of, with my novice mentality here compared to all of you, uh, because I know that you have seen films a lot more than I have. There's one that has impressed me quite a bit, and there's two versions of it. And I'm sure you know of Sleuth with Michael Caine and the other one famous. And then,
Laurence Olivier.
yes, and then they did the second one with Michael Caine playing the older and Jude Law playing the youngest. I enjoy that film. Maybe that's below your level, but I thought it was interesting.
I don't know how to take that, Sela, but I'll pretend it's a compliment.
No, I mean it as
Anyway.
I just don't think what you guys think of that movie. That's all.
Oh. I like Schaefer. I like his plays. I like I love Amadeus and I love Sleuth. And anytime I see it, I can see it on stage. I will. I don't remember the film all that well. I'm gonna have to rewatch it. So I'm glad you reminded me that it exists. I did see the remake with the Kenneth Branagh directed from the Harold Pinter screenplay, and I, for various reasons, didn't particularly care for it. But neither here nor there. I do want to watch it before. I don't want another Oppenheimer situation where I got to trash a film in my own room. So I'm going to watch it before I make a decision about putting it into a schedule. So there. Well, I'm gonna end just. There's a quote that went through my head as I was watching this from Henry James when he was asked about why he was considered a female a women's writer, and he said his answer was that there were two kinds of taste: the taste for the emotion of surprise, which is mostly male, and the taste for the emotions of recognition, which is mostly female. And that typical, very obscure Henry James answer. And to me, that sums up what they did so well in this film, which is they took this kind of, to me, annoying kind of writing style that Henry James has, where he can't even give a straight answer to that, and he, as High so eloquently put it, made it an asset, and I do love the fact that this film stands unique and that it wasn't imitated to death, but there's a part of me that wishes that there were more films like it. And so, and that's my last note on The Innocents. Next week we will be doing the ruling class. That will be with Peter O'Toole, same time of 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. That was the request of Adam Cloud. So that was a viewer request. Wait, let me double check the schedule. I might be skipping a film. Bear with me. I apologize. Yes, it is the ruling class. Just double checking. Sorry. Yes. Next week, the ruling class starring Peter O'Toole. It is available free on YouTube. It is at least in my district, or in the United States of America. There are two versions of it. One is 32 minutes longer than the other. Just going to tell you straight out, doesn't matter which version you decide to watch. You'll have the same conversation here. If you watch the shorter version, you are not going to miss out on anything. There's nothing in those extra 32 minutes that we're going to discuss much. So it doesn't matter which version you decide to watch of the film.
Eric, one short comment. Chacker, I think that's how you pronounce that, is asking about what we do here. There's a list, a schedule of the films that we are going to be discussing, and that's how you find out which movies we are going to see that movie and then discuss them.
Yeah, just go straight to the UK Cinema History Room, and where you see the dates and the time, just on tabs, just click on the tab, and the movie, it'll say Thursday 4 p.m. Thursday 4 p.m. Thursday 4 p.m. And the movie that we'll be discussing that week, all the way through the second to the last week of March, will show right there on that tab, so that you have plenty of time to watch the movie and join in the conversation. Thank you for asking. We appreciate you being here. And Yelena, we always appreciate you being here. Yelena has been our ride or die fan since day one. So. But anyway, I think that's as good a note to end on as any. Thank you, High. Thank you, Leonard. Thank you, Sela. And we'll see you all next week for the ruling class.
Thank you, everyone.
Want to join the conversation? Every Thursday, we record on the Clubhouse app. Just follow the link in the episode description, and you can be a part of our panel.